Hi, this is Kalen, and welcome to The Drop. In today's episode, the first of a two-part series, we'll be discussing California's state water project with one of its foremost experts. We'll dive into the impacts, challenges, and future of this vital resource. Hope you enjoy. Today we're joined by one of the leading voices in California water management. Please welcome the Director of California Department of Water Resources, Karla Nemeth. Director Nemeth, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm terrific. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
So just to get us started for some of our listeners, would you mind sharing just a bit about your background and what led you up into your current role?
Sure. So I am the director of the California Department of Water Resources. This is a post I've been in since 2018. And prior to that, I was a deputy secretary at the California Natural Resources Agency and senior advisor to then Governor Brown. And so Governor Brown appointed me to run the department in 2018, and then Gavin Newsom reappointed me in 2019. And I would say it's been quite a run when you think about a couple of droughts and a couple of big flood seasons. And while it presents many challenges, it also means, reality is upon us. And that's actually as someone who likes to solve problems, it's exhilarating to really lean in and get some work done for Californians.
Awesome. So in this episode, which is the first of a two-part series, we're talking about the role and the impact of the state water project, as well as its current and future state. Before we get too much into the weeds with that, Director Nemeth, perhaps you could give us a brief overview of what the state water project is for maybe those who aren't as familiar.
Yeah, so the State Water Project, it really provides vital infrastructure that planners decades ago realized would be essential for the growth and prosperity of the great state of California. And in 1960, Californians voted to adopt what's called the Burns-Porter Act. And that led to the construction of the State Water Project, which was designed to bring water from wetter parts of the state to drier parts of the state so that we could develop and grow. The State Water Project as a system is vast. It's one of the largest water infrastructure systems in the world. It's a system of canals, dams, reservoirs, pipelines, aqueducts, power plants, pumping plants, and it spans more than 700 miles, which is two-thirds the length of California. It begins in the northern part of the state at what's called Lake Oroville, which is in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and then ends in various locations across Southern California, particularly Lake Paris in Riverside County.
Okay, so it's substantial. So and it's not specific to necessarily one group. It's not just Southern California or just residents. I mean, it's a major provider of water for just about everybody from agriculture to residential. Is that accurate?
That's right. That's right. So, just physically, if you think about it, essentially two-thirds of California's water supply originates in the Sierra Nevada as snowpack, and we move that water, all over the state of California. The State Water Project, in particular. Provides water to Silicon Valley and communities in the Bay Area. In fact, communities in the Bay Area are actually more dependent than Southern California on this critical water supply source. Sometimes in California, we start to think about this as a north versus south issue, but
Mm-hmm.
it's actually not true. And many Northern Californians rely on the State Water Project. And then our system goes all the way down through the Central Valley. It goes to the Central Coast, to places like Santa Barbara, and then it goes all the way through the Inland Empire and down through San Diego and to the border with Mexico. And one stat that I just find stunning is that the State Water Project, in and of itself, because California is so big, it provides water to 1 in 12 Americans. 1 in 12 Americans get some of
Wow.
their water supply from the State Water Project. So it's pretty incredible.
So to backtrack on that a little bit, we're talking. You said Americans, not Californians, but Americans. So
Correct.
this has reach outside just our state then.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And when you think about, the parts of California that also rely on things like the Colorado River, how we manage the water that comes from the State Water Project is actually important to many Western states because all of these pieces need to fit together, particularly when we think about the challenges to these systems, not the least of which is sort of more extreme weather, but also very importantly, aging infrastructure.
Hmm. For a little bit of context here, EMWD just our district alone is dependent on the State Water Project for about 30% of our water supplies, and we have what's considered an extremely diverse portfolio for our water. But it's extremely important just to us and our customers as well. Okay, so we've said obviously this has major implications, not just for California, and not even just for uh, maybe even the U.S. But you recently came and spoke at EMWD to give a little bit of context and some information on the State Water Project. And something you had mentioned was that there was global impact as well. And is that something you might be able to touch on?
Yeah, well, California really is, not just a breadbasket for the country, but it's a breadbasket for the world. And State Water Project water supplies serve about 750,000 acres of farmland. And that farmland is extremely productive. And, for example, you all may remember the earthquake in Japan and the
Hmm.
subsequent meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear reactor. And in that moment, when Japan needed a stable, high protein food supply, California, with water irrigated from the State Water Project, we sent millions of pounds of almonds across the Pacific Ocean to help stabilize a real humanitarian situation uh, in the Pacific Rim. Um, California also, the State Water Project also supports an enormous amount of manufacturing and tech. Silicon Valley, of course, is just a major economic engine, not just for California and the U.S., but across the globe. And so our ability to supply water in a reliable way to Silicon Valley has enormous economic implications that extend beyond just the state and the United States. And in point of fact, Silicon Valley relies on the State Water Project for about half of its total water supply. So, really, a supply that you can't, you know, conserve your way out of or recycle your way out of. We need all of those pieces to come together as strategies, and so many of these roads lead back to the stability of this enormous piece of infrastructure that Californians had the foresight to invest in, 60 plus years ago.
Obviously, you are kind of the name when it comes to this, the expert, not just with the governor of the state, but I remember you saying something, and I don't know if I'm allowed to ask about this, but you mentioned the NSA contacting you as well to talk about the State Water Project. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so that was an interesting moment,
Am I,
and
am I
this
allowed
was
to ask about that, or am I
sure.
going
I
to
think so.
disappear
I think
tomorrow
so.
mysteriously? Okay, just making
um,
sure.
yeah. So yeah, that was in the context actually of flooding in 2023,
Hmm.
and imagine that scenario. We had uh, an eruption in of aggression between Russia and Ukraine, and Ukraine is very much a breadbasket for the world.
Sure.
And so, of course, when we start thinking about sort of international kind of food security, a lot of folks, point to California, including the NSA, to understand better the threats to that food security, and that, of course, includes water. And when it includes water, it doesn't only include situations where we have pretty catastrophic flooding, which is what we had in 2023, but
Mhm.
also how we move water during the dry periods. And one of the things that's so important about the State Water Project, and lots of folks ask me, because water tends to be pretty divisive in the state, or people really, sometimes I think people are like sort of captured or excited by how fraught the conflict has been historically.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, um, the solutions for water, and in particular solutions for the State Water Project, and in particular solutions for the Delta, those these have been around for decades. We've understood the vulnerabilities in our system of that presented by that part of the state. And really, every governor that gets into office, regardless of the political party, takes a look at the risk and takes a look at the importance of the State Water Project, and they come to the same conclusion: is we need to protect this supply and improve and rehabilitate this aging infrastructure so that it performs the way that we need to for the state of California, for the United States, and really globally. And that's a situation, where the NSA has a real understanding of vulnerabilities across the United States, and really it was after Hurricane Katrina in 2025, or 2005 rather,
Mhm.
um, when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which was obviously, really looking at the incredible devastation of Hurricane Katrina, started looking throughout the US about where were these really critical pieces of infrastructure that had significant vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
And you know what their number one vulnerability was the Delta in California, and
Wow.
the way that we have pressed 100-plus-year-old peat soil levees into transporting water for 27 million Californians, um, a couple $1 trillion economy, and 750,000 acres of irrigated agriculture. And that is fundamentally the State Water Project.
Wow. Well, I guess it's nice to be noticed at least,
Yeah,
but it's a little scary
right?
as to the why. But
Yes.
well, you teed that up perfectly for me to kind of jump into my next section here. You use the word vulnerabilities being the top of the list here nationally. S What kind of
Mhm.
vulnerabilities are we talking about? I know it's aging infrastructure. It's an old system as well. Or parts of it are quite old. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really kind of three key things: old infrastructure, impacts of the weather, lots more extreme weather conditions kind of setting upon us, and then environmental issues, which are real legacy issues that the state has known about for a long time. And what is important about it is these are vulnerabilities we have the capabilities to address. When it comes to things like aging infrastructure, it really requires a system that can move water efficiently. It's becoming just increasingly important to move water more efficiently when those rain and storm events do come, so that we have water available when we have extended dry periods. And those dry periods are getting longer and drier. And what sometimes I think people don't understand about, sort of the flip side of the coin with, climate driven, more extreme weather, really that the factor of warming temperatures is warmer air holds more moisture. And what that means is when we do get precipitation in the state, even, there's lots of evidence that shows, especially in Northern California, with the sort of onset of warming temperatures and climate conditions, that precipitation is going to largely remain the same in Northern California, but it's going to come at different times of the year, and it's going to come in these warmer storm events, which importantly means more rain and less snow. So the ability of our infrastructure system, when those storm events are coming and they are moving, if you can imagine these two big watersheds that have 12 or 13 or more tributaries. That's the Sacramento San Joaquin watershed.
Hmm.
Um, which is when that thing is running, it's double the size of the Colorado River, mind you, which supports
Wow.
7 states and the country of Mexico and tribal nations. It's double that when that system is really moving. And so, what we can anticipate is, you know, we'll have those opportunities. We're going to have to be ready to move that water, put it underground, put it in reservoirs, recycle it, use it more efficiently than we do today, because we know sort of the the other factor of these warming temperatures is when it's dry, it's getting really, really dry.
Right.
And that means even things, even the food that we grow, even if we change the sort of kinds of crops that we grow, everything's just going to be thirstier. And so we know that these warming temperatures, when it's dry, actually become their own new and growing demand on the water supply that we have available to us. Really, that comes in, had traditionally come through storage and snowpack, but really run off into river streams and reservoirs. And that's our collective challenge, is to improve, rehabilitate, and redesign that system to address that vulnerability, which is really upon us right now.
So you were recently part of the published the State Water Project Delivery Capability Report.
Right.
It was a lengthy document,
Yes.
a lot of big words. I did my best getting through parts of it, but one of the parts you made some startling projections for the potential decrease in water deliveries if no action is taken.
Yes.
And it, I believe, I can't remember exactly what I think it was, at least a 13% decrease or something like that, ranging fairly high as well, um, because of the change in climate.
Yes. Yeah, and that is really due to warming temperatures and the fact that um, the precipitation. We'll get the same amount of precipitation. Again, coming in different times, and it'll come warmer. But that precipitation has more demands on it through dry soils where the water sinks into the ground and evaporation into the atmosphere. And that's what we're really capturing in that delivery capability report, kind of writ large. What we also point out in that delivery capability report is, if and that's with our existing facilities in place, which again were facilities that were conceived of in the 1960s, and carry that ethos and vision of the day. We know a lot more today. No big surprise there. And
Hmm.
so, you know it's not a surprise that a system designed that many years ago would have some important inefficiencies, but inefficiencies that become increasingly important when we see these climate conditions really emerge. And that's what's captured in our delivery capability report. And we know that if we build a tunnel under the delta as an alternative way of getting through that very fragile kind of delta ecosystem, that series of um, very old levees that I mentioned, we know if we construct that, we can at least be ready to kind of recoup some of those supplies when we have these extremely wet conditions.
Hmm.
And 2014 or 2024 was a really a little bit of a painful reminder of the inefficiency of the existing infrastructure.
Sure.
And what I mean by that was, we had a wet year. We were classified as a wet year, not as wet as 2023, but definitely up there. And part of our challenge was where our intakes, if you will, where we withdraw water from the system and put it into those canals and aqueducts and ship it all over the state. That is a place that has just this fundamental conflict with how salmon migrate through our system. And salmon in California, one iconic species. We have a fishing industry in Northern California that depends on it. A lot of people like to eat salmon.
Hmm.
It's very much a part of our environment that carries a lot of value with it. And so that's a species that we know is going to also be stressed by these deeper droughts and the challenges that these warmer temperatures are bringing. But what's sort of painful about it is we also know that our existing infrastructure for the State Water Project um, doesn't treat them very well, and it's just and what I mean by that is when we turn our pumps on, when there's a lot of water in the system, as water managers, we're going, yes, this is the time. We got to move water because you never know when the storm system's going to shut off. We don't know if we're heading into a drought or a deeper drought. Um, at exactly that moment, when we have salmon that are trying to migrate through from their natal streams up in the Sierra down through the Delta and out the Golden Gate Bridge, and of course, then they come back again 3 years later, when they are doing that migration, and we turn on the pumps
Hmm.
for our water infrastructure, we attract those salmon and we trap them at the pumps. There's no physical way to limit, capturing the salmon except turning down the pumps and really kind of kneecapping our ability to deliver water to communities and farms and families. And so that fundamental conflict, um, which again is something that we've known was a vulnerability of how the original system was designed,
Hmm.
but that vulnerability is becoming, just increasingly acute and increasingly untenable, because the state of the species is it's declined significantly, during the duration of the State Water Project, just for a whole variety of reasons. And what that's doing is that's just putting a lot of regulatory pressure on our ability to operate the system. And so 2024, to bring it all back to the spring of 2024, really wet year, really wanting to move water. And at exactly that moment, we were turning down the pumps. And I think, Californians who pay for this system, look at that and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Surely we can do something better, both for water supplies, but also for salmon species, because Californians care about the environment. So, to me, that really is just this important dimension of the tunnel, because what we're doing there is we're moving the intakes for this critical piece of water infrastructure to a place in the system that is naturally and physically designed to be a lot more benign than the way that we have to manage our interaction between pumps and salmon now. Um, you may not know this, but when we get salmon sort of trapped in the pumps, we put them, into tanks, into trucks, and we physically drive them around to a different part of the estuary where we dump them in the water. And, you know, our environment and our ecosystems evolve in a fabulous way, um, over time. And what has happened is a lot of the predator species have now become accustomed to, where we drop those salmon into this estuary, and they wait there and they feed off these young salmon. It's
Wow.
just this incredibly, invasive, clunky, pretty ridiculous system, for protecting the salmon. And if we only had different, points of where we divert water from the system that didn't require that, the salmon generally would be much better off. And that is part of, it's a subtle part, but that is part of, this tunnel delivery system that we've been designing for some time now.
Okay, so let's lead into, I guess, Delta Conveyance project then a little bit and what that offers as a
Yeah.
solution.
So, what the tunnel system does, and so it's a single tunnel. There had been earlier proposals for two tunnels, but, I want to clarify this is a single tunnel,
Hmm.
and it includes two, new water diversion intakes in the northern part of the California Delta, this tidal estuary, that's inland from the San Francisco Bay. And it protects us in a couple of ways. One was the sort of helping to ease this fundamental conflict that we have between the existing pumping infrastructure and the environment. And that in turn leads to, um, sort of improvements, if you will, in our regulatory conditions. Meaning, we want to be in a situation where in a spring like 2024, we can turn the pumps on and we cannot inadvertently catch salmon at those pumps. And that is what the tunnel system provides. We estimate that if we had had the tunnel in place in 2024, we could have moved almost an additional 1 million acre feet of water with almost no damage to species. And that's something that's in our grasp, right? We
Hmm.
we ought to be able to do that.
That's achievable.
Yeah. And in a couple of other ways is our California Delta is also very susceptible. When I was talking about Hurricane Katrina, um, and the Corps of Engineers came to look at the California Delta, and they were looking at a couple of things. They were looking at these levees that were built in the late 19th century, so late 1800s, of dirt, really peat soils. That's what we actually move all this water that is up coming in from the Sierra Nevada. We move it through these system of very old levees that are very vulnerable. They're vulnerable to earthquake. We think that there's a two-thirds chance of an earthquake that's at least 6.5 in magnitude in the delta. There's many fault lines running through the delta,
Hmm.
over the course of the next 20 years. And so you can imagine, if you have an outage of one of those levees, we get an earthquake and we have multiple levee breaches. What happens is the Pacific Ocean through the San Francisco Bay rushes in to fill this delta essentially with saline water. And what that means, if that occurs, and we don't have a tunnel in place, it means we can't move any water to the Californians who need it. So that's a key vulnerability of the system that the tunnel sort of prevents against, or protects us from, because the tunnel would be deep underground, seismically retrofitted so that it would survive that kind of an earthquake. This two other really important threats to the way that we convey water now through this levee system. One is sea level rise over time, and that is, if you're familiar with sort of levees and the sort of the water side of the levee, when you have this kind of wind wash against the levee, it starts to erode it over time. And we
Hmm.
know that with sea level rise, we're going to have increasing pressure on these levees, um, and and that creates a real threat of levee seepage or breaching. And then we have that same scenario where we have salt water rushing into this estuary, which is really commingled with water supplies for 27 million Californians, and it essentially shuts it down. And then I would say the third real vulnerability to that system is also these extreme precipitation events. So I think everyone is aware that in 2023, certainly Southern California got walloped as well as Northern California. But California itself had 16 atmospheric rivers hit our coast, all up and down the coastline. And we were watching that very closely, and particularly in January of 2023, where we had some of the most violent storm events coming through. And initially, we were tracking them to move right through the Golden Gate. Um, but ultimately, they shifted a little bit southward, and that's why we had that 400% historic snowpack in the central and southern Sierra. And I, for one, every time those storms, drifted just a little bit southward, and I knew they weren't coming kind of at a bullseye on that estuary or just north of that estuary, I felt a big sigh of relief, because those really significant storm events of big intensity, um, when you start moving that much water through the system, it really stresses, again, these very old levees, that, that just really aren't up to aren't up to the charge. So the other real point of vulnerability that a tunnel protects us from, because again, we're moving water underground. We're not moving those water supplies, through that series of levee systems. So it really does protect us from a big storm coming through and knocking out that system. Lots of folks ask me, what keeps you up at night? It's never just like the single extreme event. It's a cascade of extreme events where things don't go right,
Hmm.
where you have kind of a cascade of effects. And what I mean by that is, 2023, I think we got lucky as it relates to the State Water Project. But remember, we were coming off like the three driest years on record. And those three driest years on record were followed by some of the three wettest weeks on record. And to me, a real catastrophe is when we get those really wet storms coming in after a very intense dry period where Californians have been conserving water, Californians have already been under water rationing. Our water districts have really drawn down their storage. Um, Man, we have a big storm coming in and we lose a levee and then can't use what Mother Nature is giving to us
Hmm.
to refill our storage. That is you get the sense of like, and that is an exponentially bigger catastrophe for Californians. And those are the things that really keep me up at night, but also really keep me going, because we've made all of this progress on this project, and we really do understand its grave importance. Um, what I will say, Kaylin, is folks may sort of intuitively say, well, why don't we simply just rebuild these levees into something stronger?
Right.
So we have levees that are sort of orders of magnitude, kind of super levees, if you will. And when we look at all these threats together, the earthquake threat, the sea level rise threat over time, the atmospheric river, big pulsing water systems, we don't really know how to design this levee system to really deal with that challenge, especially when you couple that challenge with, remember, I was talking about our existing pumping infrastructure and how disruptive it is to
Hmm.
migrating salmon. Even if we rebuild those levees, we're still going to have these moments where it's a very wet year. Um, our systems are responding, salmon get the cue and they start to migrate out to the ocean. And even with a rebuilt levee system, we would be in the position of drastically turning down our pumping infrastructure to deal with that just fundamental conflict. So it's never just one thing, just like the whole, the catastrophe is a cascade of a bunch of things going wrong. Fixing our system against these vulnerabilities is making all of these pieces work, and that's why we're so focused on this tunnel. We've been studying it for a long time. We've looked at many different alternatives to it, and there is not another alternative that addresses all of those things: the aging infrastructure of those levees in the delta, the climate, more extreme weather impacts on those levees, and this fundamental conflict that we have between where our existing infrastructure is and salmon migration patterns.
Well, as if there weren't already enough things to keep me up at night, I now have this to add to the list.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's good to be in the know, though. You've talked about this a little bit, so we don't have to touch on it too much. But I was going to ask, what differentiates the DCP from past proposals? And I think you touched heavily on how it impacts the salmon population. But is there any other major? And I think you talked about the tunnel
Yeah.
situation as well. Is there any other part that you'd like to highlight that differentiates with this current plan?
Oh, sure. So, originally, in the Schwarzenegger years, um, which was, coincided with this, with Hurricane Katrina and the Corps taking another look. The original proposal was a canal. So people may or may not remember what's called the peripheral canal. It was very divisive in California in the late 70s and early 80s, but it was essentially a canal around the Delta that was pretty pretty intrusive to those communities. You think of just this, large physical piece of infrastructure, and then these, um, the height of all the supporting infrastructure around it. Um, just very disruptive. And so that was our original proposal, and the original proposal was meant to match the existing delivery capacity of the 750 miles of canals I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
which is 15,000 cubic feet per second. That was the original proposal for the canal.
Sorry, can you
um,
repeat that number? Because
it was
I'm still trying to.
15,000 cubic feet per second.
Wow. Okay.
And then we decided to put it underground early in the Brown years, and we decided to reduce the size to 9,000 cubic feet per second. And then Governor Newsom in 2019 wanted, being sensitive to cost concerns by water users, and water security for California. And it doesn't stop at the tunnel, right? There's lots of things we need people to be doing. We like to talk about, an all of the above strategy. And what that really means is, you know, imported water will always be part of our overall water supply in
Of
most of
course.
California, but you still have to do the recycling. And when you're conserving water, you're using less water, but you have the same, sort of ongoing costs. So conservation comes at a cost. Um, Brackish water desal or ocean desal, all these things need to happen in some combination. So when Governor Newsom came in and he was looking at the two tunnel proposal and getting some feedback from our big urban areas that it was too big, then he decided we'll just do one tunnel, 6,000 cubic feet per second. And that's going to give us enough of this opportunity when we have these big pulsating events to move as much water as we can and get it into place. So the proposal has evolved significantly over time in size and really putting it underground. Um, you know, it's not the peripheral canal from the 1980s that Northern California was very fearful of. It's Oh gosh, that the original proposal back in the day, I think, was about 22,000 cubic feet per second. So it's
Wow.
almost, four times smaller than that now, and it's underground. And I think that's why, over time, we've started to see, other users in the state who are anxious about those earlier proposals really take a step back and say, oh, I understand what's happening here. We understand this as a critical climate adaptation piece of infrastructure. We really understand just the enormous, economic underpinning, that the State Water Project supports with this, multi-trillion dollar economy. I think people really do start to get it. And that's why I personally feel like um, there's so much work to do in California water to care for all corners of the state that sometimes we get to what I call kind of this circular firing squad, and people can't make progress, or we get paralyzed and we don't want others to make progress because we think it comes at a cost to us.
Right.
And it doesn't. And I think the tide is changing, because I think we've got the right project and the right size, and it enables the parts of California that are dependent on these supplies to also invest in other key water sources, because it's going to be the whole mix that helps California be more resilient to these swings between very wet, short duration, very wet periods into long duration, very dry, very warm periods.
Well, I guess we can take some comfort in the fact that at least this is something that we can all agree on the fundamental
Mm,
perspective of this is water, we need water.
yes,
So at least that gives a pretty strong baseline to start building from.
yes.
Um, so from this point, from here, I mean, what do we need to do? What needs to happen to get this, for lack of a better word, flowing?
Yeah. So we have done all of our environmental review, and we are heading into kind of the final two state permits. One is around, the State Water Project sort of right, if you will, to divert this water from this new diversion point. Those permits will be done before the end of 2026, and then we will, move into. We'll be prepared to move into the construction of the project. But local water districts need to make decisions about whether and how much they want to invest in this project and the security that this project brings. And so for Southern California, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, of course, 19 million people, they will vote on the next sort of tranche of funding for this project. I believe it's on December 10th.
Hmm.
And then really over the course of the next 2 years, you mentioned the delivery capability report of the State Water Project. We will start to really roll up our sleeves and make sure that we understand with greater precision all the water districts in Southern California and in the Bay Area and other places. Um, the water that they need, the investment in that supply, so that we're not putting water agencies in a position of maybe over investing in one supply. That's a real concern. There are lots of very real water rate pressures on Californians. So we're going to spend the next 2 years making sure that this project brings water to where it's needed, and that if you are a ratepayer who's investing in this project, you you realize the benefits of this improved water reliability that comes to this project.
Hmm.
And then from there, we start. We will have another vote in a couple years around, bigger dollars that are related to getting the construction going, and then we move into construction. It's not a surprise that this is a long duration construction project, 12 to 15 years. So it is going to take a while. Um, but frankly, in my view, this project never gets easier and it never gets cheaper than it is today. And so we really do need to move with all deliberate speed, even though it wouldn't be operational for another 10 to 15 years. Boy, if we don't start right now, in 10 to 15 years, all the conditions around us will have intensified, and we won't be as ready as we need to be.
So I do want to add and plug here that yesterday our board actually passed a resolution in support of the Delta Conveyance project. So this is something that Eastern has been very transparent about in our
Mhm.
support of it and our viewpoint on this project. We feel that it's very, very important, and our board signified that yesterday at our meeting. So you've got us in
Right.
your corner.
That's
Um,
good. It's a smart investment.
um, and with that flowing comment, I just found out I've been told that I have exceeded my puns for this specific podcast, so I'm not allowed to make any more. I get booted apparently.
Okay.
Um, let's talk about a difficult topic, maybe. And you've alluded to this a little bit already, but I mean, this is water. This is important. This is aging infrastructure. This, you would think that this is a pretty straightforward task that everybody could agree on, but as you said, there's a lot of controversy and a lot of conflict over this. Can you talk a little bit about the opposition, what their perspective is?
Yeah, and I want to start by saying, folks who oppose this project, I do understand where they're coming from, and they're good people that are really concerned about the unknown, and trust in government, really isn't at its highest point,
Sure.
to understate things. And so they're just really concerned that we build this project, it will deprive the estuary of needed water supplies. We have a lot of modeling that demonstrates that it won't. But I think the overall concern is, because the State Water Project supports a multi-trillion-dollar economy, that if when push comes to shove, if something goes wrong, or there's some added pressure that the state given the economic engine that water can be, that the state will flout protections that are in place for folks that live in and near the delta. And so I think that that is an understandable concern. I think we need to, continue to do our level best around communicating with people, talking about the way in which we can construct, as part of this project, some, co-benefits that would be helpful to those communities in the Delta. And that work is underway, but really in fits and starts, because sometimes people don't want to engage because they're so frustrated and concerned. But we're going to continue talking to those folks about it, and hopefully come up with something that I would like us to come up with something where um, we can see real benefit to people who live in the Delta. We have other opponents that are very anxious that, um, when you look at the cost of the project in aggregate, it's a big number, um, but not a big number, in my view, in the scheme of things. Again, when you sort of compare it to the economy that it's supporting. But a lot of opponents are concerned that, if you build this tunnel, the cost of it, displaces other kinds of projects that, um, they might rather see happen, or they pose things as kind of an either or. You can either do this or recycling, or this or brackish water desal, or this or stormwater capture. I think that's a fallacy. I think we need to, and local water districts need to describe, as at Eastern, you've got lots of different supply inputs, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
Water from the Colorado River, lots more dissolved solids, or a lot more salinity problems. Um, you got to combine that with water from the State Water Project to blend that in a way that is less costly to treat, which helps ratepayers and their overall rates. So,
Absolutely.
all these pieces need to work together. And I think some of our opponents, because the water agencies are working out all of those elements, some of the opponents just believe if you say yes to the tunnel, that it means other investments in water conservation and other things are off the table, and it's just not true.
Well, and I would think, from your comment earlier, how much this project, the proposal for it, has changed over the years. I would think is a pretty clear illustration of how much people are willing, you guys are willing to come to the table and talk and edit and work with the communities on this project. So I absolutely hear and respect that. And you had mentioned just how large of an economy this supports, and that's actually something we're going to jump into with Dr. Sunding in the second part of this to really talk about the economic impact um, of the DCP, which is it's substantial
Hmm.
um, and really eye opening. So really really interesting stuff, and that tees us up very well for the part two of this. Uh, so I want to start kind of concluding, and I want to use a quote that you gave while you were here giving your speech that I thought was really hard hitting, and that is that we have no better option than the one that is right in front of us today. When the current system fails, it will be harder and more expensive than the current option. Um, wow, I mean that's pretty clear.
Yeah, to me, Kaylin, what's so important about that statement is when the system fails.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a matter of if,
It's
it
when.
will fail. And it's up to us to, have the vision and courage of the folks in the 1960s to look at the State Water Project, understand the benefits that it has afforded us for a very long time, and really, have the courage to reinvest in it.
Director Nemeth, thank you very much for joining us. And to our listeners, thank you for diving in with us as we discuss this very large, complicated, but ultimately incredibly important initiative. For more episodes, please visit us at emwd.org/thedrop. I wanna know your name.